Not everyone does know what a buyer's agent is. So let's start by saying what they are not. A buyer's agent is not a real estate agent trying to sell your property. Ben, it's also not a mortgage broker who's helping you get finance. And it's not someone who just sends you listings that you've already seen online. So it's helpful to start with what we're not, Ben.
Property marketers who are real estate agents who are potentially moonlighting, saying that, they'll look around and keep an eye out for you. No, they're selling developer stock. So they're working on behalf of the developer, and they're selling that stock. And so that's a big one for me.
All right, so what is a buyer's agent then? They're a personal strategist in the property market who is hired by you. You pay them. They're hired by you to act only in your best interest. And I think for the entire episode going forward and for next week's as well, that is the fundamental difference here that we want to land the plane. They are working entirely in your best interest, tick. They're hired by you, tick, and they're a strategist in the property market for you. They're not someone else in some other discipline who is actually trying to be your strategist because they need to have the mix of qualifications and experience to be actually able to do that.
Bryce, so effectively, what am I buying? I'm buying your time as the buyer's agent to allocate time for my brief, and I'm buying your expertise, in terms of how you can curate all of this information and allow them to make recommendations on behalf of presenting certain properties for you. So I just think that that's really important.
Yeah, we're going to go into a fair bit of depth on this later, but just at that headline level, they source, shortlist, inspect, analyze, negotiate, and guide you through to settlement. So if you can imagine a timeline from A to B, there is a methodical process that you go through to get from where you are to where you want to be. And that's around finding them, shortlisting them, going and look at them, analysing if they're worthwhile before they even come to you, then go and negotiate and get through to settlement. But in another part of it, Ben, is part, I want to choose my words here, right? But part counsellor, let's be honest, because there is an emotional component to the real estate transaction that is not easy to describe or mentor or coach through until you're actually in the moment, because there's a couple of things when there's a rush of blood. That rush of blood needs to be tempered by making sure you don't overpay, and also making sure that rush of blood isn't motivated by something that captures your attention on the pro side, but knocks out all the cons. You've got this list that you want, and you go, yeah, that's got an amazing view, but it doesn't have this, and it doesn't have this, and it doesn't have this, and it doesn't have this, which was part of your initial brief. So there's a part of that really needs to be guided through, and that's a big component around that heart component.
I think that is so the ability for the buyer's agent to communicate effectively around what Bryce just said, which is those nuances, is absolutely critical. Because in most respects, you just don't get to negotiate the property in isolation without competition. And so, if you've got one or two or three other bidders on that property, the conversation you're having at that time, when all of the energy and, like we know that property markets move in cycles, and sometimes you want to buy counter-cyclical, but other times you know that you want to be on this upside lift and you want to try and get into that market, but you're going to need to get into that market under competition. And so as part of that discussion that you're having with your client is, you potentially got what we would call a great buy, a good buy, and a stretch buy in terms of what that might look like. And then sometimes, and to the point you just made earlier, Bryce, if a customer hasn't been through that process themselves around falling in love with a property and missing out on that property and then realizing they've got to start again, and this is why, I've always said owner-occupiers will pay a premium for a property every day of the week, because the reality is that, when they lock in on a property, and if they can afford an extra 10 or 20 grand, they will pay it. because they judge the need that they say, okay, over the next 10, 20, 30 years, am I going to be worried about the price that we just paid? And there is this buyer's emotion that they are going through. And as a buyer's agent, you've got to prepare your client for those scenarios. And in some cases, you just might have a great day and you just get it for a great price. But in other times, you've got to meet the market ultimately if you want to get that dream asset, especially for owner-occupiers.
Yeah, well said. So I guess the reality is that most buyers are going up against trained negotiators without any training themselves. So that's that bit about real estate agents doing it all the time. So they're selling homes all day, every day, whereas the average average buyer might purchase maybe one or two properties every decade. So I guess what the buyer's agent is flipping that power imbalance back towards your favour, so that you're represented in the negotiations.